Good afternoon, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, live from my parents' dining room because I'm having internet issues. I'm Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, back for the second episode of Zeise is Right with Post-Gazette columnist Paul Zeise. Paul, how are you?
I'm good. You're at your parents' house. I was actually out driving, and I had a couple of different appointments to get to. So my chiropractor, Dr. Moriali, was nice enough to let me use his office because it just so happened to be the closest place to me when I was driving. When we talked about what time I needed to be on camera.
Yeah, so we're making it work today. If you're just joining us for the first time, this is Paul's weekly YouTube show where we riff on all things Pittsburgh sports. If you're joining us for the first time, please like this video, help us out with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss an episode of anything we're doing. And please check out the subscription deal down in the description, $6 for 6 months of access to post-gazette.com. Everything I'm writing, everything Paul's writing, everything Jason Mackey's doing from spring training, everything all our Steelers guys are doing. You can find all of that there. With that out of the way, Paul, the first thing I wanted to ask you about was we're recording this on Wednesday. Taylor Lewan, the offensive lineman for the Tennessee Titans, was just released by that team. He's made no secret of his desire to play in Pittsburgh. He's spoken very fondly of Mike Tomlin. He's retweeted pictures of himself, photoshops of himself wearing, a Steelers uniform. He seems like he wants to play here. My question for you, Paul, is that the right move for the Steelers to be making when free agency starts next month?
Well, if they don't think that Dan Moore and Chooks are their tackles, right, going forward, then yes. But it seems to me like they're pretty committed to those two guys. And if you're committed to those two guys, you already have a veteran in Trent Scott, who is your third guy, who I'm guessing is coming at a lot cheaper price tag than Taylor Lewan. So my feeling is I don't know why the Steelers would sign him. Unless, if they sign him, that tells you that they maybe think that, either Dan Moore or Chooks isn't good enough. But I've seen no indication that they're going to move away from either of those two guys. So to me, you're not signing a 31-year-old who probably is going to command premium dollar. And I don't mean, big time dollar, but he ain't coming for the minimum either. Where you have a guy like Taylor Scott, you've had him for a year now. I know he's an unrestricted free agent coming up, but it sounds like they want to try and figure out how they can, bring him back. You're not going to, they're not going to sign him for a ton of money. He's your swing tackle. I just don't know. It doesn't make sense to me to bring in Taylor Lewan.
Yeah, the only thing I'm a little curious about is he's known as kind of a brash, outspoken guy. We've talked a lot about, leadership and having a little bit of swagger in that locker room. Is that an ingredient, if not in the form of Taylor Lewan, then maybe somebody else that you think this team needs, or do you think it has the leadership in place to maybe take that next step next year if the talent is in place?
Yeah, I don't know that that's a reason why you'd sign a guy, to be honest. I mean, I think that's a little bit, for lack of a better word, that's a little bit overrated. I think there are some guys in that locker room who are, who are good leaders. And quite frankly, I think in year two, Kenny Pickett will begin to emerge as really, truly the leader of the offense. He's a guy that's a fiery guy. If you talk to the players around him, he's a guy that really is somebody they rally around. So, I don't know that you need, a guy like Taylor just to, to come in and be brash and yell and, give you leadership. That probably wasn't the issue with the Steelers. The issue is a talent issue. And, if he's an upgrade over Dan Moore to the point, to the extent where you think he makes you that much better, maybe you think about it. But again, it feels like they're pretty happy with Moore in terms of, they feel like he's come along. He's a young guy they're committed to for the long haul. Chooks is a young guy they've proven that they're committed to. So I just don't see a spot for him. I don't see anywhere where he fits. I think that if they're bringing him in, that tells you that one of those other two guys is not going to be a starter. And at that point, then you have to you're in a place where you have to draft a young guy because Taylor is what, 31 years old. I mean, he's a guy that you're not going to have as part of your long-term solution. So, it's nice that he wants to play for the Steelers. I want to play for the Steelers, but that doesn't mean that they want me. So, I think it's great off-season fodder. It gets all the Steelers Twitter up in arms and gives them something to talk about. But practically speaking, it doesn't make sense.
Does it make sense to spend money on any offensive lineman, given that critique, Paul? Or are we in a position where if they're going to add to this offensive line this offseason, it's probably going to be through the draft, just because there seems like there's a solid amount of prospects there, not only in the first round, the second round. I do our mock drafts every week. There's names I think anyone who reads that space knows to kind of look for starting in the second round, not just with that number 17 pick. Do you think the depth of the draft just makes it such that if you can get cheap talent onto that offensive line, that's probably the preferred way to do it?
I would say yes. I mean, I don't know that they need to really add much in the way of offensive linemen. I think they've got, the 3 tackles are pretty set. They've got a couple of guards that have at least one more year for them, and a center that has at least one more year for them. And they proved last year they have a little bit of depth at those positions as well in the interior. So to me, this is now a perfect time for them to draft and bring in a couple of young guys that they can, they don't have to put in the lineup right now. You know what I mean? So in other words, these are guys you can groom and get in the weight room for a year and let them grow and mature and kind of learn the NFL way, so that, say next year when a James Daniels or a Mason Cole or one of those older guys is no longer around, well, you have somebody that's ready to step in, that's been in your system for a year, that's been in the NFL for a year, that's a little bit older than just, drafting a rookie. And if he's good, he's somebody that obviously you're going to have for 10 years, or more.
Paul, I'm going to switch gears now to the Penguins, who've been struggling. Obviously, a humiliating loss on Long Island last week, deflating loss to the New Jersey Devils. And then the beginning of this week on Monday, they blew it against the New York Islanders. The playoff hopes are not gone yet. Statistically, mathematically speaking, they're very much still in the thick of things. They could very much, get a decent seed if they got a little bit hot. It just feels like that's not going to happen at this point, Paul, with the group that they currently have, that bottom 6, the guys who are struggling, Jeff Carter, Kasperi Kapanen, Brock McGinn hasn't scored in a million years. Where do you stand on the Penguins with a little less than 2 weeks to the trade deadline? Does it feel like this is slipping away from this team?
Well, this all goes back to the offseason, right? I understand why you bring the 3 guys back, and really, 2 guys, really. I mean, obviously, you're not moving on from Crosby, but I understand why you quote unquote bring the band back, and that but I include in that Tristan Jarry. I include in that, we're going to go with Jarry and Casey DeSmith. But my contention back then was, if you're committed to this, bringing the band back and getting them back together, you're basically committing to 3 years of this. And what is this? A team that's probably just good enough to get into the playoffs, but not much more. They're not going to fall. They're probably not going to fall out of the playoffs. They're probably not going to be, a team that goes back to the pre-Crosby years right there where they were, the worst team. But they're going to be a team that's going to be a 7th or 8th seed, right? Probably losing the first round, because when you've got Crosby, Malkin, and Letang, and then you add in Gensel and Rust and some of these other guys, you have enough, right? And Tristan Jarry is good enough. You have enough that you should be able to, take advantage of a lot of the bad teams you're going to play on your roster. You'll have some nights where those 3 guys have the fountain of youth, and you end up beating some of the best teams and looking like a team that can really play at the top level. But this is what they're committed to, really, for the next 3 years, 2 or 3 years. And listen, I understand why they did it. Right? I mean, the discussion in the offseason was, do we start our rebuild now, right, and just basically try and strip it down like a lot of teams have done, and then start rebuilding? Or do we just try and ride with this group and hope that each offseason we can hit magic and lightning in a bottle enough with the guys around this group, you know what I mean, that somehow we find that perfect formula that works for 1 year? This is what they've committed to. So I'm not sure why anyone would be surprised by it, number one. And number two, everyone's angry about Ron Hextall. Okay, I guess it was Hextall that gave Jeff Carter his contract, right? If you want to be angry about that, okay, probably. I mean, there's very little that I would tell you. What is Ron Hextall going to do now? Everybody wants this magic formula. Well, we're going to trade Kasperi Kapanen for somebody's, for an upgrade. Nobody's taking him in that contract. Same thing with Jeff Carter, right? They've got some guys, and they've got 9 or 10 guys that have no trade clauses. So, and they don't have a ton of great prospects to move. And even if they did, they've got to try and find a way to get guys onto the roster, under the salary cap. He's not going to trade his first round pick because he's trying to do this thing where, well, we're still somewhat in contention and we're going to try and, every year piece it together, but we don't want to mortgage the future. So my point is, I understand why Ron Hextall becomes the lightning rod here. And that maybe there's some things he isn't doing, maybe there's some little moves that he could be making and different ways he could be creative to maybe create a little bit of salary cap. But at the end of the day, this is what ownership wanted. This is their baby. So, you know what? Go to the arena every night. Enjoy watching Crosby for the next 3 or 4 years. And that's the other part of it. They didn't want to hang Sidney Crosby out to dry. Let's face it. They didn't want to put him on a really horrible team, right? Where he was going to be, in a rebuilding situation, playing with a bunch of kids. You know what I mean? They didn't want to do that to him, and he didn't want to do that. So, this is who you are. So you go to the arena. When Malkin gives you those moments, and he's giving you a bunch this year where he looks like he's 10 years ago, or when Crosby does the things that he does, or whatever, you're just in awe, and you say, "Wow!" And when they have those nights when they play really well, you enjoy it. But I don't know that it gets any better than that over the next 2 or 3 years. The one move I will say they did not do in the offseason that they needed to do, right? Even forget about bringing the big three back, and they've all played really well. And again, I really mean bringing the big two back, and they've played really well. So it obviously hasn't been necessarily their fault. But the one move that I said they absolutely needed to make in the offseason they did not make was a goalie. Go get a goalie. They could have moved on from both of these guys, really, but particularly Casey DeSmith. They could have moved on, gone out and got a better goalie, and said, well, we're going to provide competition for Tristan Jarry. We're also going to provide insurance because Jarry the last couple of years hasn't been able to stay healthy. That's the one move that they probably should have done, and they would be in a little better place than they are, but I still don't think that makes them a contender.
Yeah, I'm somewhere in between with you, Paul, because I think it's a lot to ask for this team to be a contender for the reasons you asked, but it's also true that they have Crosby, Malkin, Letang producing at their prime level for less money than they've ever had to pay them since they were on their rookie deals. They account for less of the salary cap than they ever have, and this is at the same time. Again, you're icing guys. You're right, like Casey DeSmith. They're icing a third line that by some analytics I've seen is literally one of the worst lines in hockey. To what extent should Ron Hextall face consequences for that at the end of the season? Because I agree with you. I think the idea that they're going to fix this by the trade deadline is a little far-fetched given the salary cap situation. I don't think there's enough you can do to fix this between now and then. But when we get to the offseason, should there be someone else in charge, given that this is, to your point, kind of his legacy? This is where he's supposed to be doing the work of making the team better. You can't do it on the first and the second lines because they're producing the way they should. Those are the guys that have been in place for decades at this point. But those bottom two lines are where you're supposed to get results, and Ron Hextall just not getting any.
Well, again, one of the biggest mistakes that they made was the Jeff Carter contract, and that's not hindsight. I said that at when it happened. Why are you trying to give this guy 2 or 3 more years when it's pretty clear the team needs to be trying to get younger, and if you've got the three, the 3 stars are older, obviously. But here's the other thing, Adam. I mean, guys like Gensel and Rust now, they've played a lot of hockey. They're not old, but they're not the young, whippersnappers they used to be either. I mean, this is a team that really, if you think about it, I don't necessarily think that Ron Hextall is the right guy for a number of reasons. One of them being when you committed to bringing the group back and continuing to try and win, you brought in a general manager whose specialty has been rebuilding. Made no sense. It just, you bring in a guy, and obviously you had him in Jim Rutherford, but bring in a guy like Jim Rutherford, whose specialty is trying to basically improve the team as the season's going on and not worrying about, well, if I give up this draft pick and then it doesn't leave us with a draft pick and all this other stuff. Jim Rutherford, whatever you want to say about the guy, and I think at the end of his time here, he lost his mind a little bit and lost his way and started just, I think his ego got involved and he started making deals that just probably, in hindsight, probably shouldn't have been made. But you can say whatever you want to say about him, but he understood the job. And the job was every year, whether it worked or not, every year, let's try and make us a Stanley Cup contender. And if whatever we need at the trade deadline, we're going to go get, no matter what it costs us in terms of prospects or draft picks or, even sometimes, NHL players. But again, going back to my other point, who on this team could you realistically trade? P.O. Joseph? Are you going to trade a young defenseman like him? Are you going to trade, I think he actually has a no trade clause, but, are you going to trade Jake Gensel, for instance, and try and, try and figure out if you bring one of these other guys up to the top line, they all of a sudden playing with Crosby, they produce, and then you're able to get back, Gensel and a package with him where you're able to bring in back some. I just don't know that there's really a realistic path for them to make trades, but it all starts with when ownership made the decision that they valued, keeping the group together. It made no sense to keep Ron Hextall around or bring him in even. Actually, bringing him in actually made no sense because there was never a time when they were thinking, yeah, we're going to rebuild. Like it's clear after, they signed Letang and Malkin or whatever to their, extensions or, re-signed them or whatever. It was clear when you listen to what they had to say. Those two leaving was never on the table. So if you knew that going in, why did you hire Ron Hextall? That's the question that needs to be asked.
Yeah, I think that's entirely fair. And one other thing I'll say before we move on is something that Jim Rutherford did that Ron Hextall seems unwilling to do is acknowledging his mistakes and moving on from them and finding ways to do that. Not even mistakes, but there were just guys he traded for, guys he moved on from quickly, during his tenure here. And I think that willingness to acknowledge mistakes and move on and keep trying to make yourself better constantly is something that really helped those Penguins that these Penguins are not getting a lot of help from in the front office. Paul, the next topic I want to talk about is Jeff Capel's comments on Tuesday, I believe, to reporters, basically saying that ACC media is responsible, and the ACC Network, which is ESPN affiliated, are responsible for the perception that the ACC is down this year. I said on Twitter, I can understand why it's frustrating for him to be, having one of Pitt basketball's best seasons in a while, they're still in jeopardy of missing the tournament if they lose the wrong games. And that's in part because of the schedule they're playing in the ACC, not through any fault of their own. What do you have to say about the assessment that the ACC is down, is mostly the fault of ACC media for not properly hyping the conference?
It's not the ACC Network's fault that Georgia Tech stinks. It's not the ACC Network's that Boston College stinks. It's not the ACC Network's problem that Syracuse has a coach who's held on too long and they're basically just really mediocre, even though they're supposed to be one of the teams that drives the bus in basketball. It's not the ACC's fault that Florida State and Louisville are two of the worst Power 5 conference teams in the country. It's not the ACC's fault that Wake Forest is just sort of mediocre, that Virginia Tech is just sort of mediocre. It's not the ACC's fault that Coach K retired, and you know what? Duke is probably a little bit less than what Duke usually is. It's not the ACC's fault that North Carolina has all the talent in the world and can't figure out how to win. It's not the ACC's fault. It's not the ACC Network's fault. It's not the ACC Network's fault that everybody else in the country can see these things. More importantly, yes, the ACC Network is supposed to prop up the ACC, and of course, I'm sure they do. I mean, I'm sure if you watch those shows, and I don't watch any of those network shows on any of those league networks because they're just basically propaganda for the most part for the league, and pumping up the league, and that's fine. If you're, but the people who watches the ACC Network, Adam, ACC fans. So my point is, they're preaching to a choir, right? And I'm sure that whatever was said that Jeff Capel took exception to was probably framed in a way that still was positively spun by the ACC. And at the end of the day, it's not the ACC Network's fault that right now, at last Lenardi thing I looked at, the ACC has 5 teams that are solidly in the field. When they put the ACC together as currently constituted, and they brought in Syracuse, they brought in Louisville, they brought in Pitt, right? The whole point of that was we're bringing in 3 more really good basketball programs, right? 2 of them, which are like considered, I guess Louisville is a blue blood and Syracuse is considered like right outside of blue blood, right? What the ACC needs to do, they need Syracuse to become Syracuse again. They need this to not be a one-hit wonder for Pitt. They need Louisville to become Louisville again. They need John Shire to continue to move Duke back up to where it is, where it's one of the elite blue bloods in the country. They need Hubert Davis to figure out how to coach, okay? And that's a big problem, if you ask me. Tony Bennett, just keep being Tony Bennett. I mean, these are things that they need, but they also need, Georgia Tech. I mean, the biggest problem in the ACC isn't necessarily the top 2 or 3 teams. It's the bottom 7 or 8 teams. They're not good. And that's the problem. So it's not about perception. It's about reality, right? It's about the reality of the fact is the Big 10, the Pac-12, the Big 12, the SEC. Yeah, they've got some bad teams, sprinkled within them, all those leagues. But at the end of the day, the bottom of those leagues are much better than the bottom of the ACC. And right now, because of Syracuse, Louisville, even Duke and North Carolina, right? The top teams aren't the top teams like they usually are or used to be. I mean, when they put this, again, I'll go back to this. When they put this league together, one of the reasons they put this league together, Adam, they saw the Big East was getting 9, 10, even 11 teams into the NCAA tournament, and they were jealous. And they said, we're the basketball conference. We need to be the conference that does this. And then they went out and added the best. The other team we're forgetting about, Notre Dame, who has usually been a team that gets the NCAA tournament at least. They're usually a team that's in the middle of the conference, right? That gets the NCAA tournament and sometimes actually wins a couple of games when they're horrific. And I get it. Their coach is retiring. But that was another team that was brought in to try and enhance the product, the basketball product. And guess what? They haven't really lived up to lived up to what they need to be the last couple of years either. That's why the ACC is not just perceived to be down, it is down.
Paul, I said on Twitter that I think the better point that Jeff Capel could have made is that I do feel to the extent that you can have a gripe with the ACC media, it's that I feel like they don't go to bat for Pitt the way they do for some of those Carolina teams and those original ACC teams. I thought it was true when Pitt was on their run last year to the ACC championship. I think it's probably true of the basketball team now. I pointed out on Twitter, North Carolina has been ranked in the top 13 in football in each of the last 3 years. At one point in 2020, they were number 5 for no reason at all. They've never won more than 9 games. North Carolina football on a national level sucks. And they've gotten signal boosted, constantly because of Mac Brown, because they're Carolina, and Pitt, which actually won 11 games, won the conference, did not get that. Do you think there's any truth to that Pitt does not get that boost from ACC media that definitely exists, and I think definitely is boosting teams more like Carolina, Duke, and the established ACC teams?
Well, I mean, I think that's really been the case as long as these teams have all been in the conference. I don't think it's just Pitt. I mean, I would even go so far as to say you look at a team like Virginia Tech that's actually been in the conference in Miami. They've been in the conference since 2003. I mean, they've been there 20 years. They've been there 20 years, and they're still treated like outsiders, by the main established ACC media, by the ACC offices. I mean, there's no question that things that basically Duke and North Carolina are the flagships, and to a lesser extent Wake Forest and NC State. That's just the way it is. And the ACC has to do a better job of promoting the other teams, promoting the teams that aren't the original or whatever teams that are out there. I mean, and I get that, and that's a part of it, but the bigger part of it for me is the fact that most of the teams from 7 to 15 in the conference are bad. That's a bigger problem to me than the fact that, things like, like you said, they like to push and promote North Carolina and Duke, and some of the original teams in the Research Triangle area and Wake Forest and all that stuff. Yeah, I get it. But, the bigger problem is they got to win. There's the thing. These other programs have to figure it out, or it's probably not going to get better. It might get worse.
Yeah, I agree. Paul, I know you got to go, so I'm going to get you out of here on this. Brian Reynolds spoke to the media last week. There's been some subsequent reporting that there may be $50 million apart. That Brian Reynolds seems to remain open to signing an extension if the Pirates are willing to move. What do you think the odds are that happens? And B, would that be a good move for this team?
I mean, they have him for under control for what, 3 more seasons? This one and 2 more, right? If I'm the Pirates, I ride it out. I don't even think about an extension this year. I let him play this season, and at the end of the season, I decide: am I going to commit, X amount of dollars to him, or am I going to trade him? But there's no rush to do it right now. And frankly, I don't think you're going to get the deal you want to get at the trade deadline unless maybe, one of these contenders, loses an outfielder right before the deadline, who's out for the year, and they need, a guy with a bat and everything else. Maybe you're able to get what you want for him. But to me, there's no rush to sign him. There's no, if you're $50 million apart, that tells me you're not even really talking. You're not even really negotiating. Maybe he has a little lesser of a year and he's willing to take a little less because now he gets spooked out that maybe the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow isn't going to be there for him. Maybe he prices himself out. But at the end of the day, if you give him throughout this year, just be patient. See what happens this season. If he goes out and has a big year and you decide that, hey, he can be a part of our future and he's willing to take like a 4-year deal where you buy out the last 2 years of his deal, his current deal, you buy out his last 2 years and give him 2 more. Okay, then he's 33 years old at the end of that. You probably are going to get your money's worth for him. But I don't know that if I'm them, I'm in a hurry to push to get him signed, for some long-term deal right now, because you don't need to. And that's the biggest thing about it. There's no rush to do it. The only one that's motivated to get it done is him, because he wants that long-term, stability. And I would think that at the end of this year, if you have an outfielder who, has another really good year, and you're able to go out and say, hey, he's 2 more years under control at a really good number, you're still going to be able to trade him for something. Now, you're going to have to stop shooting for the sky and the stars like they did last year, but you still should be able to get a pretty good return for him. And if you, determine that, hey, he's a part of what we're trying to do the next few years, see if he'll take a 4-year deal. Even if you have to overpay him more than you want to a little bit in terms of the per year number, if say, listen, we're going to give you $20 million a year for 4 years. That's $80 million. You know what I mean? He probably ain't going to find a much better deal than that in terms of the amount of money they're going to give him per year. So give him that. And then if he's not good or he, declines, you're only taking him until he's 33. It's not like you're married to him like some of these deals where these guys get 8, 9, 10 years. You're getting 4 years, and really you're only getting 2 years more than what you have now. So it's not like you're married to him for 10 years if, he starts to decline once he hits the magic number of 31 or 30 or whatever the number is in baseball terms.
Yeah, I wonder how far he'll go down in term because he's been asking for 8. I think 4 is probably a little low, Paul. But if they can get him for 6 and $20 million, there's still teams that are going to want him at that number when he's in his early 30s. And if you think he's not the right fit for you because of where you are in your rebuild at that point, you can trade him. $20 million is not this massive albatross unless he goes in the tank. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it, is lock in that number now. He'll still be an asset to other teams at that price in the same way Chris Archer was, or at least looked like he was going to be when the Pirates wanted to trade for him. The reason they liked him is because he was at a cost-controlled extension. That would be kind of the same thing for Brian Reynolds in 2020, $5, $6, $7. So that's all I would say, is if you can get that done as the Pirates, I would do it, but not feel like you're married to him forever. Paul, was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we signed off here?
No, that's about it, man. We got it done again.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us for the second Paul Zeise show. We're going to be doing this every week, so if you enjoyed it, make sure to stop by every Wednesday afternoon, every Thursday afternoon is when we publish, and check that out. Paul, thanks for stopping by.
All right, we'll see you, Adam.
Later.
Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to Post-Gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.